So for those of you who have participated in our programs in the past, today you'll see, just like everything else in 2020 is going to be a bit different. As we move to the virtual learning experience, gone really are some of the opportunities to build and collaborate in that with that physical proximity that we usually enjoy in our programs. But we can still share ideas and discuss, and we can use our hour today to explore concepts of design and computational thinking more deeply, and consider how they apply to the ocean and the blue economy. And we're also going to be modeling an authentic decision-making activity that utilizes these types of thinking, and it's going to relate to our theme of aquaculture, and it's going to use a real and relevant ocean issue as provocation for learning. We'll be doing that towards the end of the hour. And while we only have an hour today, we do have some ambitious goals for our time together. And to borrow from computational thinking language to illustrate these objectives, if we want our young people to have a better understanding of the blue economy, then we need to start with regional relevance. And if we want our young people to feel a connection to the ocean, then we need to consider how we can anchor that learning in the real world, so it's something they can touch and see and feel. And if we want young people to think deeply about complex ocean issues, then we need to teach them some strategies for doing so. And we also need to model some of the approaches for doing so. And finally, if we want our young people to feel curious and inspired by the mysteries and the potential of the ocean, then we need to explore different types of resources and activities that will engage them. Just like our in-person programs, we do want this to be interactive. This technology today does have some limitations for interacting. We won't be using breakout rooms, but I would encourage you to use the chat function. We're a small group. Feel free to make a comment. I can't see you the way my system's set up. But if you want to make a comment, please go ahead and interject or raise your hand or make a comment in the chat function to say that you'd like to interject digitally. And we invite you into this. We would like this to be more of a conversation among professionals. This is how we handle all of our industry programs as well. And so I would invite you to do that. Hopefully you all had a chance to download the 2 resources that we shared for this workshop. The Taking Making into Classrooms, the 2nd edition that we're sharing with you, that was developed by educators across Canada over the last couple summers during design participatory design conferences that we held. And all the activities that are in there that were designed by educators, the pre-learning around the design thinking methodology that was co-written by mostly by Susan and also by myself. And there's some really interesting design thinking challenges in there that you can use and adapt to either your classroom practice or your virtual classroom practice, whichever you may find yourself delivering this September or this fall. We also have our new Wave of the Future book. This is a book that I wrote in the springtime while I was sitting at my kitchen table in isolation with my family. And it's a focus on the sustainable blue economy. It is available in interactive as well as print versions, and there's links on our website to each of those. And both of those resources are also available in French and English. They have a lot of activities. The Wave of the Future is, it's a lot of information, but then a lot of activities in there as well that tap into the broad kind of STEM concepts, but also have links to, to language arts and to other creative curriculum areas as well. In particular, the Wave of the Future, Chapter 2 focuses on aquaculture, or actually on aquaculture and fishing. And it really focuses on how we feed the world with the blue economy. I'd encourage you to have a look at those. They're really interesting resources. I wrote them with sort of grade 4 to 6 in mind, but as I was releasing them chapter by chapter, I did have my own kids working on them. They were in grades 3 and grade 9, and together they went through it, and it was great. They both got a lot out of it. So, as teachers, we're used to kind of adapting content to older and younger students, and so there's enough there for as a good starting point for you as well. So why do we want to focus on the blue economy? Well, even prior to the COVID situation, we saw activities in the blue economy really ramping up globally, everywhere. A lot of government funding here on the East Coast is being directed into things like the supercluster and other initiatives that are aimed at advancing ocean tech and innovation and more research centered around the ocean. And especially now as we are focused on recovering our economy, the federal government has actually highlighted blue and green technology as priority areas. You know, for too long, we really polarized industry and ecology. We put them at odds with each other. And I think now we're seeing a growing awareness of the role that industry can actually play and should be playing in a sustainable blue economy, where we focus on remediation of the ocean, where we're focusing on more sustainable industry practices that make better use of the resources, and then also gives back to the ocean as well. And aquaculture is a great example of an industry that does that, that's really oriented around those goals. You know, sustainability, of course, is in its best interest. If we use everything up, then there's nothing left for the industry. So it's also a way to address big global issues like food security, like preservation of wild fish stocks, like farming nutritious food from the ocean. And as we see, you know, globally, these challenges of growing population and growing demand for seafood, and for healthy, affordable ocean protein. At the same time, we see the supply of fish and the seafood is on the decline. I mean, we can't keep pulling from the ocean, you know, forever without having an impact. And we're already seeing that impact with some fish stocks depleted down to 3% of their original. And at the same time, we also see global challenges like, you know, ocean acidification and global warming and ocean plastics. And these really highlight the need to do better. As I said, you know, at the very beginning, there really is just one big ocean. It crosses the whole globe. It touches all of our coastlines. It is the lungs of the world. It's also the dinner plate of the world. And we know better now from many of the mistakes that we've made in our terrestrial economies that we need to do better. One of the reasons why we've applied the design thinking methodology to problem finding and exploring ocean issues is that it really prompts us to slow down in that race to, you know, to finding a solution. It prompts us to spend more time better understanding what the problems are so that we can focus on more purposeful design or purposeful decision making, and make sure that we're solving, you know, as we're solving one problem, that we're not creating another one. I'll give you an example of that because there are many examples right now of, you know, solving one problem by creating another one. And this one comes to mind, and I think this is one that many of us remember. Poor little, our turtle friend here who was found with a straw in his nose, and it was tragic. And you know, but what is the real problem here? What is the issue that needs to be addressed? Certainly, we don't want to see turtles swimming around with straws in the noses. But the original reaction, of course, was to ban straws. And of course, ocean plastics are an issue. But the issue of ocean plastics is much more complex than simply banning straws. When we look at the issue of ocean plastic straws, they comprise a very, very small percentage of the problem. But because people didn't take the time to understand what the issue was, it never occurred to them that some people actually need those straws. So this reaction of, well, ban straws wasn't necessarily the best reaction. That maybe we could think through that challenge a little bit more. And we did see some companies do a great job of that as they came out with reusable straws that we can take with us, straws that can be cleaned and reused over and over again. Because the problem, as I said, isn't just about straws, it's other issues, isn't it? It's about our dependence on single-use plastic, and it's about our throwaway habits. Another company decided to address the issue of straws by redesigning their cups. And what did they do? They used more plastic with an adult sippy cup. So did it solve the problem of straws in turtles' noses? Maybe, maybe not. Did it address the bigger, more complex issue of ocean plastics and single-use plastics and how garbage ends up in our waterways? It didn't do that. But it was an easy, palatable, and relatable challenge and solution that I think caught a lot of people's attention. And this is really the core of design thinking. It's grounded in a better understanding of the problem, and so that, as I said, purposeful design or purposeful decisions can be made. And it really pushes us to think more deeply about an issue and resist the urge to think in binary terms. And it may sound counterintuitive to push against binary when we're talking about computational thinking as well, but we don't really want to be forced into binary decisions. You know, when we look at many of the issues that we're seeing in the news right now and that are very relevant to us, we get a sense that we're being forced into these binary decisions. Our society certainly models that. That it's modeling instead a simple, efficient, and shallow decision making rather than one that has more depth and a deeper understanding of the complexity of the issues. You know, these are some examples. You know, we've got, you know, coal versus no coal, and we also tend to assign a value or an ethical kind of value to either side of that binary choice, and saying, you know, if you're for coal, then you must be anti-environment, and if you're saying no coal, you must be elitist and be anti-job. You know, vaccine and no vaccine. If you're pro-vaccine, you must be a good parent, and if you're no vaccine, you must not be a good parent, or vice versa, depending on your stance on that particular issue. And you know, school in September versus no school in September, and of course the issue of aquaculture versus no aquaculture. And some people have strong opinions about it, but we would, you know, part of the purpose of this is to get kids thinking a bit more deeply about these issues, that they might still have the same decision in the end, but is it more informed, and have they done the due diligence to really understand the complexity of these issues better? As I said, the goal of computational thinking is to analyze and evaluate these complex problems. And we don't do that by breaking it down into a simple binary choice. We do that by gathering data, by asking good questions, and by ideating around the many various options. Are there any comments or questions out there before I proceed? I think we're good to go. We see evidence of complex problem solving in aquaculture, in how industry is exploring alternative farming methods with things like open farming, open pen farming, land-based farming, recirculating systems, offshore pens, and even something called integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, which is a very complex term, which simply is based on the theory of raising crops of species that naturally cohabitate together and that naturally exist in food chains. So that they become the source of food for one another. We're also seeing simple solutions to complex problems like dwindling fish stocks with a movement that's called do more with less. And this do more with less, the Icelandic Ocean Cluster is actually spearheading this movement. And in a country, you know, an island country, an island nation like Iceland, you can kind of understand why they might be spearheading this. The premise of this is that previously, and in Canada still, they were using 40% of the fish that they caught. The other 60% was getting thrown away. As I say, in Canada, we still do that. And what they decided that as a small nation, rather than hauling more fish out of the ocean and dealing with all the waste that was coming from it, they decided, let's try and think creatively about how can we do more with what we already have. They now have processes that can actually use 100% of the fish. And using things for like fish bladders, they'll sell fish bladders, they sell cod and halibut livers. They also use the skins to make fish leather. There's some beautiful pictures of the fashions that they make out of fish leather. And then also really expensive products like collagen. And as a result, the value of a single fish in Iceland has gone from $14 per fish to $80 to $100 per fish. So it makes really good sense, and it's also a good solution that solves a key environmental issue. So this leaves us with the question then: how do we prepare the next generation to really think deeply and creatively about this? And are we doing enough of that already? The challenges when we look at the ocean and the blue economy they are grand, and they are complex, and they're far-reaching across the entire globe. The sustainable blue economy is gearing up, though, to tackle many of those challenges, like ocean plastic and habitat destruction, ocean acidification, deoxygenation, and also food security. These are huge problems that we don't expect our young people to solve these problems, but we can equip them with a better understanding of some of the issues, with a better appreciation for how STEM knowledge can contribute to a better understanding of that. We can help them to develop empathy and a sense of responsibility around this, and also develop some skills to help them think deeply about complex issues, and cultivate a new generation of young people who we will launch able to deal with these more challenging issues in the future. These are the future skills that industry is looking for. OECD, has a similar list. These are very well aligned. But what you'll see as you're looking through these aren't, most of these aren't knowledge holding skills, they're thinking skills and communicating skills that enable people to participate in collaborative problem solving. These are the skills that are needed for a sustainable blue economy to tackle global ocean challenges and leverage the ocean's resources much better. So that hopefully we don't continue to repeat the social and environmental mistakes that we've made with our terrestrial economies. I'd like to turn things over to my colleague Susan Crichton. As I said, she's a former professor from UBC. She's a failed retiree who keeps on working with me every summer. And I'm going to invite her to take us through some of the concepts of design and computational thinking. Take it away, Susan.
Thanks, Sherry. And I'm glad to see in the chat box, and thanks for some of these links and some of these ties, because what we're talking about sounds kind of conceptual and theoretical, and the bottom line is it really comes back to good old Einstein. Education is not learning the facts but training the mind to think, while at the same time recognizing you have to have something to think about, which would be the facts. So it's not, again, a binary, just think, no facts, nor is it just facts and no thinking or critical thinking. And Sherry, if we could move to the next slide, or whoever's moving us along. One of the things I get to do that I'm, as a failed retiree, is work with some very cool people like Sherry, like Anna. And here on the West Coast, a young knowledge keeper, Noelle Pippin, who did some interesting work of aligning design and computational thinking. And she and I are kind of struggling in a good way to contemplate the alignment between Indigenous ways of knowing and being and First Nations principles of learning, which we're very big on here in British Columbia. Along with the design thinking. And so this quote from her is really important, that as we go forward, what constitutes core competencies. And so Sherry, if we go to the next slide, one of the things Sherry and I really agree, sorry, I got excited and was going to the next one, but I think it's important to realize that there is a lot of energy and support right now for both design thinking and computational thinking. And we'll be sharing the alignment between the two shortly. But design thinking helps teachers address the big ideas, the big picture things that are in the curriculum, that guide the curriculum. And computational thinking, and this Tim Bell and CS Unplugged, one of my favorite resources, suggests the alignment is computational thinking offers a support for it by providing a process for the process, if you will. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So when all is said and done, what do? And it's really, really great, to tell educators, you need to do this and you need to do that, and you shouldn't do this, and all the things that are out there. So how do we go about doing it? And I think we go about doing it by taking a pause and engaging in some deep thinking ourselves as educators. We know what we know. And when we return to some of our big thinkers like, say Aristotle, one of the things we know is it is the mark of an educated mind, meaning a nimble mind, a mind prepared to learn more, that you can entertain a thought without accepting it. In other words, one of the things that's so important is to be able to hold two seemingly conflicting thoughts in your head at the same time and somehow find the obvious solution or the common ground or what's right, what's wrong with either side. And so, the definitions that we're going to use this afternoon, sorry, it's morning here, shallow thinkers, when we think shallow thinking and Garrison Schoen stuff on single loop, we're just looking at the obvious. If this is true, then that's true. And they take information on face value. And I think, I don't want to go political, but I think one of the things we're seeing in the media now is not a critical understanding of who's saying what about what, and being able to question that. Whereas a deep thinker, and I believe this is where we want our youth to go, and this is where we need education to take place, is a deep thinker looks at the whole chain of events and the impacts and the outcome and says, how can this be true? I have nothing in my lived experience. I have nothing in anything that would say that this is true. And so it's beginning to use something like design thinking to interrogate something that doesn't seem exactly right. Okay, Sherry, on to the next, please. A resource that I'm absolutely in love with, of course, is MIT and the folks in lifelong kindergarten, their lab there. That was a Seymour Papert lab, and now Mitch Resnick has it. I've been there a couple times, and it's just beyond breathtaking. But what Mitch Resnick would say, and this book is just so brilliant, is the core principles that we should be using in our teaching at all grades, and I would say this at graduate school as well: passions, projects, peers, and play. Those need to be a part of our instructional framework and our pedagogical stances if we're really to engage children in deep thinking. Sherry, we can continue, please. So, I think one of the things, again, that's really important is to recognize when we say the term design thinking, what are we actually meaning with that? And when we say design thinking, we are talking about building, modifying, and using Stanford's process, IDEO's process, and it's a 5-step process. And there's no shortcut to the process. Matter of fact, one of the things that's so magical about design thinking is it's an iterative process. So just about the time you think you're getting to the end of the process, or in step 2 or 3 of the process, you may find yourself inviting yourself to go back to the beginning. So the empathizing is really coming to understand what it is we're looking at. Do we actually understand the pieces, the terminology, the end users? This is the important aspect of the human-centered aspect of this. And then defining the problem is that tie back to the Aristotle piece. Can we hold a couple of conflicting ideas in our head before accepting one or rejecting one? Can we just hold that ambiguity and make it our friend? And then in that seeming pool of ambiguity, can we begin to define and ideate and come up with some ideas that we want to explore further? And then the wonderful prototyping process is part of that wonderful bit that the folks at Reggio Inspired Schools, Project Zero out of Harvard, they will tell is making thinking visible. How do we get to see what people are struggling with, what they're thinking about, how all the pieces fit together? And then finally, the testing. And it's not testing in the conventional way. It's really testing assumptions about other opinions within and across other opinions. I'm going to pause there just because, I get myself all wound up, and see if anybody else has a question or a comment. Otherwise, and it's great to see your face, Anna. I can see you now. I'll just see if there's any comment. Otherwise, I'll just continue to muddle along. And Anne, I see the top of your head.
Oh, I can't tell because I can't see myself either right now. Is that better?
I can see you now. You're looking great. What a smile.
Thank you. I was thinking too that this, it goes with design thinking and computational thinking, that, it really helps kids understand that we're not failing, we're just trying again, or understanding failure. And that's, I know, something that we've struggled, this is my going into 33 years teaching. And that's one of the biggest problems, is forget them to try things. So, I mean, this ties in with that too.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I think if as an old dog here in the room, if I could destroy, throw away, hit delete on a word, it would be failure. And, a lot of people say, oh, no, Silicon Valley, the answer to everything, is fail forward, fail often. That's actually not the quote. And it's worth digging that out, particularly those of us with a background in computational thinking. That's not what was being said in that, and it isn't about failing. It's about trying, and it's about testing, right? Because bottom line is, you really, as part of your pedagogy, are going to say to kids, let's all embrace failure. No one's going to jump onto that boat with you. The language alone undoes learning. But to test things, to try things, to explore things, this is us as educators rethinking our own language for the times and the conditions we're in. And I would say the gift that COVID has given us is we have watched top-end scientists try and test and give us conflicting information and changing information and new information. And the people who struggle with that, I think they're not used to watching people think. And we're watching scientists, public health people think in real time. Now I'm going to go back to the slide because I could get lost in a heartbeat. So Sherry, if we could go to the next slide, please. So design thinking, I think we know this, it's finding and resolving real problems, ill-defined problems. And we know, good heavens, since March, we've had enough ill-defined problems to make relevant curriculum for a lifetime. It also, design thinking is a set of techniques with a human-centered approach, set with intentions. And Sherry's going to talk more about intentions when we get into the design challenge structure that we use. Because to just throw people into the deep end, literally, around thinking through ill-structured problems, without offering them strategies and approaches and intentional ways of unpacking them, is just plain unfair. Everything doesn't have to be invented. This is something we learned in the early days of inquiry, bringing inquiry and education into play. Everything isn't worth an inquiry. Some stuff's known. 2 + 2 is still going to be 4. That's not an inquiry question, right? But how to divide a pie fairly with 5 people? Now there's a question, right? So I think the key here is design thinking supports divergent, convergent, and lateral thinking all at the same time, which takes us back to our friend Aristotle, who's saying holding different ways of thinking. And it's a mindset. And Sherry, if we go to the next slide, we'd be remiss in anything to not talk about fostering this growth mindset. And I think at this stage of the game, we all know it. We all, embrace it, I would hope, to some degree. And the link here, this TED Talk, I think sometimes as educators, we owe ourselves over a nice glass of wine or a good coffee to sit down and watch somebody tell us again the origins on this. And so Sherry and I wanted you to have this back to this original TED Talk, because it's kind of like going back to the mountain to hear the real deal. And I think many of us have taken interpretations along the way. I said to Sherry, there's no way on earth I could possibly ever engage in a presentation without getting to use this slide, because to me, the elephant and the monkey are everything. At the end of the day, what do we want for youth? And I think we want optimism. I think we want them to realize that, yes, things are tough. They've always been tough. Challenges have always been hard. But with good thinking and good design, there is a way forward, and we can get through this. And what I love about this slide is it really models the model, because honestly, I don't know whether it's the elephant or the monkey who's more optimistic, but every time I look at it, it makes me smile, and it makes me realize that optimism requires a process, particularly when things get tough. You need to see a way out. You need to see a way through things. And I think, one of the things most of us who are designers say, trust the process. And that's what we want to give to kids. Be a deep thinker. Here's a process to help you. Trust the process. I think, Sherry, on to the next slide, probably the most important thing is helping kids gain empathy. I think we're watching this now playing out with all this stuff with, the We organization and all these other things. This is a moment where we're really going to have to strengthen the kids. Things aren't wrong, things aren't right. Things are usually somewhere in the middle. And self-worth comes from doing something worthy with yourself. And that's something you've got to define for yourself. And if you're a kid, you probably need an adult or an older person to help you figure out what that worthiness is. But this Massey lecture, I would encourage you to read it if you haven't. It's just truly a beautiful Canadian gift to the world, the Massey lectures in general, and this one in particular. Sherry, I don't know if you want me to continue to rattle on, but
Sure. Yep.
This notion that ideas, however outrageous, have changed the world and they will again. I think we need to continue to give kids current, contemporary, simple, wonderful examples of ideas that have moved things forward. And Sherry's got just a ton of wonderful ones Sherry and Anna put together in the ocean resource. And this one is just a simple, amazing thing that takes your breath away, because this is gravity. This is just kinetic energy causing light, creating light. And so the more of these examples we can give to kids, the more examples we can show that tough problems like living your life without light after it becomes dark can be remedied with some of the simplest things on the planet. It's just good thinking. And I think in particular, the next slide is, how do you encourage people to engage in good thinking? You ask them good questions. And how do you help people give you great answers? You ask even better questions. And so one of the things Sherry and I are really thrilled to give you is this link, and maybe Anna can throw it up there, but it's a little resource. It's not, the end of the world, the most amazing thing, but I'm in love with it, because what I've done is pulled together about 500 great resources and just made a one-pager that's just really some good questions to ask, and threaded and tied along the revised Bloom's hierarchy of how do you ask good questions and how do you be a good critical friend to help people hold those two conflicting points of view. I think we can go on to the next slide. So what's the tie? And so this, I think, was kind of the end of my little spiel here of what's the tie? How do you connect the dots? Oh, no, I have one more. And the tie between design thinking and computational thinking, and this is something Sherry and I've really been working on, is, are they two different things? Are they supportive things? Are they interwoven things? And I think we're coming to really hold the thought that they are part and parcel. They are connected. And so they're connected in that computational thinking helps you describe a problem. It helps you identify the details. It helps you break it down into logical steps. And right there, if you don't have this resource or this link to this resource, I'm going to put it in the chat. Tim Bell's work out of New Zealand on computational thinking, it's a totally free Creative Commons resource, is just absolutely stunningly brilliant. And if we can go to the next slide, Tim says that computational thinking, here's where it fits, is it allows you to do all these kinds of thinking and understand that they're all simple patterns. They all do things. So they all do something different, and you may not choose to do all of them. You may choose to do one of them. You may embrace a particular one. If you're a primary educator, wow, focus on pattern recognition. If you're teaching the higher grades, you can probably move into more complex computational thinking. But Sherry, if you could show the next slide. This is where we think the magic occurs. And this is where we think the overlap. And this is where our next work is really wanting to go. And then in connection with some indigenous ways of thinking and learning and being. But take a look at the overlap here, that as you're moving through the design thinking process, which is the top, computational thinking allows us to interrogate each of those steps and to take them into a deeper bundle or a deeper process. And so what we're arguing for, and one of the things we're going to be working on, is so as you slow down that design thinking process, and as you can, and so, and your point's well taken, sometimes kids see solutions to big problems because they have no preconceived notions. That's correct. And then sometimes they're a bit overwhelmed, or they become a tad quick on a solution to that. You're blind, so here's this, or you can't hear, so here's this. But what we think computational thinking will bring to this equation is then a process to interrogate each of the steps further of the design thinking process. And so, Sherry, I think that's my piece you wanted in there. I am just bullish and excited to explore further that slide with those little bubbles overlapping, because I think there's some truth there, and I think there is some really powerful learning and instructional strategies to be had.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. Why don't we pause here for a minute and just see if there's any questions or comments from the people who are with us.
And thanks for that. I'm going to explore that. That's another. I'm not seen that resource before on computational thinking. So, Sherry, I'll capture that so we can look at it as well.
That's Great. Another, yeah, they work also with Discovery Education, so I know a lot of offshoot things. So I hope you don't mind me sharing it. I'm not trying to say, I'm looking forward to looking at your resources too.
The more the merrier.
I make connections. It's one of I either connect people, I connect ideas. It's like one of those things, one of my talents.
You know what? My email always says, the closure on it is none of us are as smart as all of us. And I think that's why we do these things. And back to you, I would say really explore Tim Bell and push it out, because it's free, it's massive, and it allows everybody. Talk about an equity of access resource. When he says CS Unplugged, he means computer science without technology.
Oh, and that, yeah, a lot of teachers would really be happy to start there, because that's where they're most comfortable at first, and then maybe we can move them along.
Oh, please take a look at it, and then I would love to hear from you what your thinking is on it.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
That's great. And, that ties in really well with the approach that we've taken with all of our workshops, is our connection. Often when people hear about, maker workshops and so on, they resist because there's been there's a notion that it's always rooted in some kind of coding and programming. And we work ours further back in, around the thinking and the design instead. And then at further iterations would certainly involve that. But we want to sort of invite more teachers to come in and partake in the thinking part of all of this. And so, that's really been our connection with this right now. I also wanted to say that the two resources that I mentioned at the beginning and that we're sharing with you, they were also designed under Creative Commons. So they are free to share, to use, to photocopy, to do with whatever you please. And so please feel free to share those with your colleagues as well. Susan, did you want to talk about this Learning Compass before we move to our final thing?
Oh, you know me, of course, I'd be happy to talk about anything. But the OECD Learning Compass came out, it was actually new last year. And I don't know, have you explored that at all? Or Rula, I think it is one of the most astounding contributions for OECD to throw together. And there's a resource, there's a video, but I think most importantly, with the Learning Compass, it is about a compass for how do we help students engage in what they're calling transformative learning? What I would call, transformative learning is great. I would also just call it good, deep learning. But yeah, and if you haven't, and Rula, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, holy, this may be the biggest gift yet. And what they've broken it down is it's truly, great. It's truly around how do we foster student agency? And we don't just do it by saying, okay, students, let's have some agency. It is saying there are transformative competencies that have to be in play in learning. And Sherry and I believe, are on the same wavelength on that. They have got to align with that notion of deep thinking and that ability to handle ambiguity and to hold conflicting bits of information and make sense out of it and make your own thinking. So this notion of creating new value, reconciling tensions and dilemmas, and taking responsibility is huge. And of course, OECD, remember, is the international organization that brings together, I forget how many nations are involved in the OECD, but it's really the good thinking. And Canada has had a big role in this OECD Transformation Learning Compass. So really, really, this is, you're in Nova Scotia, I'm in British Columbia. The thing that connects us is really the OECD and that notion of transforming learning to transform students from being shallow, quick thinking, get it done, can I show mastery, to do I hold competency and deep thinking about complex issues.
Great, thank you. So what I'd like to do, Susan, with our and everyone, with our last few minutes here, sorry, I'm just going to pass through a few of these, is just share with you an example of a design thinking challenge that we've written for today, and to share with you all. And this is an example of how we've taken the same kind of framework that we use with our, which is right here, the same kind of wireframe that we use with our typical design thinking challenges, and how we're applying that to a decisioning challenge instead. This one is not in our making into classrooms book. This is a new one that we're happy to share with you as well. But it's something that we can also use either in our classrooms with our students and can be modified for the different grades. It is a great example of authentic learning, of using real events as provocation for digging into a really interesting decision-making challenge. I have changed the name of the company, Seafin Fish Farms. It wouldn't take too much effort to figure out what company it's really talking about, and it probably would be fine to actually mention them. But the overview of this particular challenge, it looks at a recent opportunity for a Scandinavian salmon farming company, a giant company, to move into Nova Scotia. And what we do is we provide an overview of the scenario, of what the opportunity was, or what the topic is. In this case, they wanted to come in, they wanted to bring in some 6 locations across Nova Scotia with open pen fish farming. The advantages, of course, is spending $400 to $500 million in our local economy, as well as contributing 300 jobs. And on the downside, we had issues related to, NIMBY, not in my backyard, and as well, and also, issues around water pollution and so on. We also provide a design rationale that sort of outlines what the issues are that are maybe competing. And I thought it was interesting what Susan said about being able to hold 2 competing ideas in our heads, or 2 competing positions in our heads, without necessarily having to jump to one or the other, but to consider both of them. And I think this is really what we're doing, because that the issue that the media presented to us was, it's a yes or a no for this, and without giving people as much opportunity to really explore the issue with a lot more depth. This is something we can certainly do in our classrooms, because it has such interesting connections to a lot of the science and STEM concepts that we're already teaching. But it also connects to things like society and economy and ecology and bigger global issues around food security. Our problem scenario here is that that they want to expand into 20 new sites, and of course, we're not positioning this as a binary choice of yes or no. We're just presenting this as here's what they want. But we do tend to outline our success determinants, because this helps provide a little bit of boundary and set some expectations around what we want them to do. In this case, we're presenting these in terms of how they use information, how they involve other people, and it invites them to be looking at data, to interrogate that data, to question the integrity of the source of the data, and then to also consider then their own reactions to the issues, which would of course tie in with NIMBY. And so a starting point for us here today, or for you with your students, might be really just to start on, what are some of the questions that we need to ask about this? What are some of the ways that we can come up with a more informed decision about this? What are some of the issues that relate to economy and ecology and society? And what are other relevant issues that we need to be considering, and where can we find that information? This is a great example of really applying inquiry-based decision-making in an authentic and relevant way that kids can relate to. Some of them will have heard it on the news, some will have heard parents talking about it, and it invites them, draws them into the conversation. I'd like to just pause there because we just have a couple minutes left here for comments or questions.
Sherry, I'm going to jump in just because I can't help myself. And so with this design challenge, what we would do with it then is start right, and Sherry, maybe we go back to that slide 32, which is those little bubbles. But what we would do with this typically is then invite the inquiry with the design challenge and say, okay, here's what you need to do. Gain some empathy. What's the issue on both sides of this? Defining the problem and really tearing in there, doing some research, bringing in speakers, using that handout, asking great questions, that kind of stuff. And then drop into, and this is the new thing for us, drop into the computational thinking and say, which of those approaches, are there some, as we begin to define and ideate, are there some patterns that are becoming clear? Are there some if-then logic? If this is true, if the issue is too much fertilizer in the water, then the solution isn't really the fish, it's the poop of the fish, So all of a sudden these things shift a little bit. And so we would use this entire process, all 9 of these little beautiful bubbles, to tear apart slowly and to interrogate, maybe over an entire unit of study, a month of study, a week of study, but certainly not an hour of study, an issue that we position in our design challenge structure. So we use the design challenge truly as a provocation for a unit of study. Back to you, Sherry.
Thank you very much. And I see we are right at 2 o'clock. And as a courtesy to our participants who will probably be moving on to their next session, I'll pause here and say thank you very much for joining us today, and just leave you with a final thought here. This is from Seymour Papert that says that we learn because it's hard, not in spite of it. And I think that's a really key concept that we need to keep in mind, that we can present grand challenges like this to our students and get them involved in thinking through big, tough, complex issues. And they often, they enjoy that. They enjoy the challenge of it. Susan, any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
I just thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing resources, because truly none of us are as smart as all of us together. So, and Sherry and I would absolutely welcome feedback. So as you explore these resources, ours or the others, please let us know what sense making you're making of them, because it isn't just about push, push, push. It's really about sharing.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.